The smirk, that's what broke me. It wasn't the absurd, life-altering number she just quoted. It wasn't the gasp from my own wife, Sarah, beside me. It wasn't even the cold, dismissive nod from my father, a man I'd spent my life trying to please. It was the smirk on my sister Chloe's face, a slight, almost imperceptible upward curl of her lip that said everything words never could. I have you. I own you. And I am enjoying this. She had just tripled my rent, effectively kicking me out of my own history, my own home. And our parents called it fair. They watched her do it and called it fair. In that moment, I realized family isn't just about blood. Sometimes it's about who is willing to bleed you dry. They thought they had won. They thought they had broken me. What they didn't know, what Chloe couldn't possibly comprehend behind that smug, self-satisfied smirk, was that she wasn't just kicking me out of a house. She was awakening something inside it, and inside me, and I was going to make them all pay. Not just with money. Oh no. I was going to make them understand what it truly means to be haunted. Our family operated on a simple, unspoken principle. Chloe was the sun, and I was a planet caught in her orbit, expected to revolve quietly and provide stability. She was the brilliant, beautiful, and wildly irresponsible older sister. I was the younger brother, the steady one, the one who fixed things. While Chloe was collecting art degrees and jet setting with her flashy husband, Mark, I was learning how to replumb a 19th century bathroom and patch a slate roof. The object of our silent war was the family home. Not just any house. The Blackwood house, my great-great-grandfather, Alistair Blackwood, built it with his own hands in 1888. It was a sprawling Victorian behemoth, full of dark wood, hidden corners, and the weight of generations. It smelled of old books and beeswax. I loved it. To me, it wasn't property. It was a living member of the family. After our grandmother passed, my parents, wanting a simpler life in a condo, asked me to move in. The deal was simple. I'd pay a monthly rent of $2,350. This wasn't for their profit. It was a formal agreement to cover the exorbitant property taxes, insurance, and a dedicated fund for the endless, costly upkeep the old house demanded. I was its custodian, its caretaker. For 10 years, my wife Sarah and I poured our lives into that house. We lovingly restored the intricate woodwork, updated the wiring, and tended the gardens until they were the talk of the town. We brought life back into its old bones. Chloe hated the house. She called it a creepy money pit and constantly badgered my parents to sell it and split the profits. Imagine the payout, Dad. She'd say at Christmas dinner, we could all get new cars. Mark and I could finally afford that place in the Hamptons. My father would just sigh while my mother would placate her. One day, sweetie. It's just ... complicated. The first real cracks appeared when Mark lost his job. He was a consultant, which was a vague term for a man who wore expensive suits and produced nothing of value. His unemployment, coupled with their lavish lifestyle, sent them into a financial death spiral. Suddenly, Chloe's interest in the creepy money pit became intensely predatory. She started with whispers to her parents. It's not fair that Alex gets to live in a mansion for practically nothing. She'd murmur over the phone, loud enough for me to hear when I was visiting. Market rent for a place that size would be 10 grand a month. We're losing money. My parents, who had always been susceptible to Chloe's dramatics, started to parrot her talking points. You know, son, my father said one Sunday, Chloe has a point. You've had a good run in the house. But times are changing. I tried to reason with them, showing them spreadsheets of the upkeep costs, the invoices from contractors, the property tax bills that had nearly doubled. I wasn't just paying rent. I was pouring my own salary into preserving their legacy. It didn't matter. Chloe had painted a picture of me as a freeloader and them as the victims of my good fortune. The slow burn tension was becoming a raging fire, and I was about to be engulfed. The family meeting was Chloe's idea. She summoned us to our parents' sterile condo, a place with no history and no soul. Sarah held my hand under the table, her knuckles white. Chloe and Mark sat opposite us, looking like a pair of smug vultures. My parents sat at the head of the table, looking uncomfortable but resolute. "We've been talking," Chloe began, her voice dripping with fake sincerity. "And we've decided it's time to run the Blackwood house like a proper asset." Mark chimed in, adjusting his tie. "It's a simple business decision. The property is underutilized financially. We're restructuring the arrangement." I felt a cold dread creep up my spine. "What does that mean?" Chloe finally dropped the facade. She slid a single professionally printed sheet of paper across the table. It was a new lease agreement. My eyes scanned the text, but my brain snagged on one number: monthly rent, $7,100. I laughed. A short, sharp, incredulous bark. "You're joking. That's impossible. That's more than my entire take-home pay." "That's the market rate," Mark said smoothly. "In fact, we're giving you a slight family discount." "Discount?" Sarah finally spoke, her voice trembling with rage. "We've spent over $100,000 of our own money renovating that house. Your father approved every project." I turned to my parents, my last hope. "Mom, Dad, you can't be serious. This isn't about market rate. This is our home. I'm taking care of your legacy." My mother wrung her hands and looked at the ceiling. "Chloe and Mark are struggling, Alex. They have kids to think about. We need to be fair to everyone." And then my father, the man who taught me how to use a hammer, the man whose approval I had craved my entire life, delivered the final blow. He looked me dead in the eye, his face a mask of cold disappointment. "It's fair, son. Chloe will be managing the property from now on. You either pay the new rent or you have 60 days to vacate." My world tilted on its axis. The air was sucked from my lungs. I looked from my father's stony face to my mother's deliberate ignorance. And then I looked at Chloe, and she's MIRKED. It was tiny. Fleeting, but it was there. A flash of pure, unadulterated triumph in her eyes. It was the smirk of a predator that had just crippled its prey. In that moment, the loving, if complicated, family I thought I had simply evaporated. They were strangers. Strangers who had just conspired to ruin me for their own gain. I didn't shout. I didn't argue. I just stood up, my chair scraping harshly against the floor. Sarah followed, tears streaming down her face. "Okay," I said, my voice eerily calm. "I understand." We walked out. As the condo door clicked shut behind me, the grief and shock solidified into something else. Something hard and cold and patient. They thought they were evicting me from a house. They had no idea they had just locked me inside with my oldest and most powerful ally. The house itself thought my revenge wouldn't be loud or immediate. It would be silent. It would be meticulous. And it would be absolute. The first week was a blur of despair. Sarah and I walked through the rooms of Blackwood House as if they were already gone, ghosts in our own home. Every creak of the floorboard sounded like a goodbye. But on the 7th night, as I sat in my great-great-grandfather's study, surrounded by his books and his legacy, the grief finally burned away, leaving behind a cold, clear purpose. Chloe's mistake wasn't just greed. It was arrogance. She saw the house as a pile of bricks and wood. She never felt its presence, its personality. I had. I'd spent years listening to it. The groan of the pipes was its sigh, the whistle of the wind through the eaves its whisper. And now it felt like it was listening to me. My plan began not with a lawyer, but with an archivist. I started digging into the house's history, not just the romantic family stories, but the legal documents. I spent days in the dusty county records office, poring over century-old deeds and titles. My parents had inherited the house, yes, but how? From whom? The paper trail was convoluted, a tangled mess of wills and codicils, and then I found it was a document from 1925, penned by Alistair Blackwood himself. He hadn't just willed the house to his children. He had placed it into a generational trust, a legal entity designed to protect it. The document was explicit. The Blackwood house was not to be sold. It was not to be leveraged for commercial gain. It was to be preserved and occupied by a direct blood descendant who served as its custodian. The custodian was responsible for its upkeep and in return was granted the right to live there. Any family member who attempted to exploit the house for profit would forfeit their claim to the trust. Permanently. My parents were never the owners. They were simply the previous custodians. And now, so was I, my monthly payments of $2,350, which I had meticulously documented for a decade, weren't rent. They were my legally binding contributions as custodian. As I held the document, a strange thing happened. A cold draft snaked through the sealed, stuffy records room, flipping the page to Alistair's signature. Outside, the sky, which had been clear, suddenly darkened, and a low roll of thunder echoed in the distance. It felt like an affirmation. The next phase of my plan was legal. I found a lawyer, Mr. Sterling, a quiet, ruthless man who specialized in old trusts and estate law. When he saw Alistair's document, his eyes lit up. "This is ironclad," he whispered, a predatory grin spreading across his face. "This is a legal masterpiece. Your sister and parents have made a catastrophic error." While Sterling began preparing the legal assault, I started the second, more subtle part of my plan. I played the victim. I called Chloe, my voice cracking, and begged for more time. I told her we were struggling to find a new place. I let her gloat. "Tough luck, little brother," she'd said, the satisfaction evident in her tone. "It's just business. You have until the 1st of the month." She thought I was broken. It was perfect. During this time, the house grew more active. Doors would creak open just as I was about to enter a room. I was searching for old tax receipts one night, and a heavy leather-bound book fell from a high shelf, landing open on the exact page I needed. Late at night, sitting in the dark, I'd hear faint whispers in the walls, too indistinct to be words, but the feeling they gave me was one of encouragement, of alliance. Alistair's journal, which I found tucked away in a loose floorboard in his. Study a floorboard I'd walked over 1,000 times, but never noticed was loose. Before spoke of the house having a stone heart, a memory in its timbers. He wrote, "She is a good house, but she is a jealous one. She provides for her keeper, but she will suffer no traitors beneath her roof." She remembers. I was no longer just fighting for my home. I was fighting with it. We were going to remind my family what it meant to betray the Blackwood name. The final piece of the plan was the setting. It couldn't be an email or a lawyer's letter. It had to be personal. It had to be in that house. I called my parents and Chloe. I told them I had the first month's rent, all $7,100. I asked if we could meet for dinner at the house one last time. To hand over the check and say a proper goodbye. Chloe agreed immediately, her voice dripping with condescending pity. "Of course, Alex, we'll be there. Let's make it civilized." Civilized was the last thing I had in mind. The night of the dinner was unnaturally still. A thick, expectant silence hung in the air, broken only by the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall. Sarah and I didn't cook. We ordered catering. We were merely setting a stage. My parents arrived first, looking somber and vaguely guilty. Chloe and Mark swept in a few minutes later, radiating smug triumph. Chloe surveyed the dining room, which Sarah had set beautifully with our best china. "Well, aren't we making the best of a bad situation?" she said with a little laugh. "Don't worry, Alex, we'll take good care of the place." We sat down. The tension was suffocating. After a few minutes of painful small talk, Chloe clapped her hands together. "All right, let's get the unpleasantness out of the way, shall we?" "The check?" I didn't move. I simply looked at the head of the table, towards the doorway. In a moment, we're just waiting for one more guest. Right on cue. The heavy oak front door creaked open. Mr. Sterling stepped inside, his briefcase in hand, his severe expression cutting through the strained atmosphere. He closed the door behind him, and the sound echoed through the house like a vault ceiling shut. "Who is this?" my father demanded, his eyes narrowing. "This is Mr. Sterling," I said, my voice as cold and calm as a winter morning. "He's the executor of the Alistair Blackwood Generational Trust." Confusion warred with anger on Chloe's face. "The what?" "Dad, what is he talking about?" Mr. Sterling placed his briefcase on the table. "Your father can't answer that because, like you, he was unaware of his precise legal standing. This house has not been owned by anyone in your family since 1925. It is owned by a trust." He opened the case and produced the documents. "A trust with very specific, very binding rules. Rules you have all violated." He explained everything. The custodian rule, the preservation clause, the absolute prohibition against using the house for profit. With every word, the color drained from my parents' faces. Mark began to sweat. "My client, Alexander Blackwood," Sterling continued, gesturing to me, "has been acting as the de facto custodian for 10 years, fulfilling all duties. Your attempt to extort him for market rent constitutes a flagrant breach of the trust's covenants." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. "As of this morning, a court has affirmed my client as the sole legal custodian of the Blackwood estate, and the trust has voted to remove you." He looked at my parents, "and you," his gaze fell on Chloe, "as beneficiaries. Permanently." Chloe just stared, her mouth hanging open. The smirk was gone, replaced by a mask of horrified disbelief. And then the house began to scream. It started as a low groan from the heart of the building. The lights in the chandelier above us flickered violently before plunging the room into semi-darkness. A blast of icy wind ripped through the dining room, though all the windows were sealed shut, scattering Sterling's papers across the floor and extinguishing the candles. My mother shrieked. "What's happening?" Mark yelled, jumping to his feet. The portrait of Alistair Blackwood, hanging over the mantelpiece, suddenly crashed to the floor. Chloe screamed, pointing a trembling finger towards the darkened hallway. "There's someone there." I saw someone. The whispers started then. Not the gentle, encouraging ones I had heard, but angry, sibilant hisses that seemed to come from the walls themselves. They sounded like a legion of furious voices all speaking at once. A door slammed shut upstairs with the force of a cannon shot. My family was frozen in terror, but I was not. I stood up and placed a single document on the table in front of my sister. An eviction notice. "You have 30 days to vacate my house," I said. That broke the spell. They didn't walk out. They fled. They scrambled over each other, a panicked herd, and burst out the front door into the night, their screams echoing behind them. My parents were the last to leave, my father looking at me with an expression of utter, soul-shattering defeat. Then, as quickly as it began, it was over. The lights flickered back on. The whispers ceased. The air grew still and warm again. I stood alone in the dining room, in the heart of my house. Sarah came and stood beside me, wrapping her arms around my waist. We had won. We had saved our home, but I had lost my family. The price of justice was a piece of my own soul, and I wasn't sure if the trade was worth it. We are the Blackwoods of Blackwood House now. The only ones left. The house is quiet these days, it feels. Content. Protective. I am its custodian, and it is my sanctuary. But the peace is not absolute. Sometimes when the wind is just right and the night is deep and starless, I hear things from outside the walls. Faint sounds carried on the breeze. It sounds like my sister's voice whispering my name, begging to be let back in. But I know, and she knows, that it's not up to me anymore. The house remembers. And the house will never, ever unlock the door for her again, Dot. So let me ask you, what would you have done in this situation?